Hi, my name is Stephanie Carroll, and I am author of A White Room, which is a historical novel about a turn-of-the-century housewife who goes insane and hallucinates that her house and furniture are coming to life and plotting against her. Her only escape from her madness comes from pursuing her dreams of nursing and secretly and illegally tending to the poor, even though her new husband prosecutes unlicensed practitioners. Today I'm going to read you the prologue and chapter 1 of A White Room. And here we go. Prologue, October 1901. My father died with the taste of blood on his lips. To think that was why I was up to my elbows in it. Not his blood, not that they knew of, but I was still covered in it. Red handprints on the walls, crimson footsteps on the floor, and me. I was smothered in it, stained with it. I sat in the dining room of a house that smirked at me like a living creature. The furniture trembled with joy, and critter designs on the dishes bit their tongues, holding back cheers. I felt the dry blood cracking on my fingertips. I rubbed my hands together under the table while the investigator scrutinized me. Had the house won? Would it finally swallow me whole? Would my husband, still very much a stranger to me, would he turn me in to his colleagues waiting outside? All I wanted to do was keep the promise I made my father on his deathbed. And now I am accused of butchering a woman, my best friend. I just wanted to keep my promise. It was such a simple request, made with blood-smeared lips. Chapter 1, January 1901. My eyes moved across the people on the ferry. Death lingered on the tips of everyone's tongues, and everyone everywhere was clad in black crepe and taffeta. What an odd time to be newlyweds. I glanced at John and considered him, clinging to the hope that affection would grow with time. I looked down at the ring he had given me, a tiny pearl atop a gold band surrounded by a circle of white opal spheres. My sister Florence eyed it after the wedding. "Emmeline?" she said as her smile turned. "Pearls mean tears." John had recently graduated law school, and his father wanted him to mentor under a friend, Mr. Carswell, who had a firm in Labellum, Missouri. On January 28, 1901, a few weeks following our private ceremony and only 6 days after Britain's Queen Victoria died, my new husband and I sat silent and still on a ferry to Labellum. Not only were my family and I in mourning, people everywhere mourned the Queen. A marriage was supposed to be a happy occasion, but the dark curiosities surrounding death twisted the minds of everyone around us. We docked at the edge of the little town nestled between two bluffs that made it look like a hole in the side of the world. I had lived in the city my entire life, and now my best option in the world was to live in a hole. We plodded off the ferry, and John led me to our surrey, a plumb boxy carriage with a fringed canopy top and bench seat. The gray-haired driver made sure the horse clocked through town quickly. "Just wait until you see the window moldings," John went on and on about the house he found. "Oh, and the parlor, it truly is an architectural wonder." He explained the previous owners left all their furniture and decorations. I didn't know why anyone would abandon their furnishings, but I imagined it was a sad story. Still, if the house was lovely, I knew I could be happy. The town was tiny and my husband a stranger, but I could be happy running a beautiful home. It was the one thing I would have authority over. When I was young, I detested my mother's decor. Whenever I complained about it, she reminded me that when I got married, I could decorate however I wanted, and I didn't have to use a single thing she had chosen. Not like I could. Those things were all gone now. "We're getting closer!" John held himself up to see how far we were, but the rocking surrey pitched him back onto the seat. I stared at him as he grinned out in front of us, bobbing around to see past the driver and horse. John was attractive. Not my ideal man, but still, he looked fine enough. He had dark, nearly black hair, which he wore slicked back, and he kept his face clean-shaven, a new trend that I found quite agreeable. He was thin, not muscular, not tall, but still not shorter than I. He also had what I could only call as startling dark eyes, which could be seen as a good thing. At least he was 25. Women in my situation have often found themselves married to a 50-year-old widower. I also thought he found my appearance acceptable, hopefully. I had an average figure for a 23-year-old in feathery fawn-colored hair, a small nose, and generally pink cheeks which glowed on unsunned skin. I hoped he didn't find my apparel unappealing. Unlike the rest of the world that might mourn the Queen for a few weeks, I had to wear blacks, purples, and eventually white mourning garb for almost another year. "We're here! We're here!" John shouted and unsuccessfully tried to stand up again. I lifted my head and sat taller to see, struggling to glimpse through the trees flashing past. When I finally laid my eyes upon it, I saw a structure that was not what any home should be. The driver turned at a break in the trees and took us on a straight path toward the monster. When we stopped, John jumped off to fiddle with something before offering his hand to help me out. If he had offered it immediately, I wouldn't have taken it because I was stunned to stone, gaping at the bizarre construction before me. "It was built in 1880, John said. A Gothic revival, I believe." I unfroze and remembered it was supposed to be a happy day, but the only thing I could say reflected my disenchantment. "It looks dark." "What do you mean it's white?" John reached out his hand, and after a brief hesitation, I grasped it and stepped out, drawing up my skirt to prevent a snag. How could a white house seem so dark? The entire building, apart from the russet wood-shingled roof, was red brick painted over with a pasty white. The red base seeped out from beneath the blanched masquerade. It was overbearing, like a fortress bloodied from war, then disguised as a house by some conspirator, or perhaps the house itself. A ring of bare, broad, and slender-trunked trees circled the house, then thickened into woods. Winter stripped the trees naked and covered the forest floor with a rug of decay. I imagined a splash of sunset color in the fall. The broad leaves certainly turned orange, yellow, and a blazing red just before blanketing the ground with a sea of fire. But now skeletons lingered all around. John raved about the structural design, but it wasn't a marvel. It was a catastrophe. Structurally sound at best. The interior stuck out farther than the rest, and the sides jutted out like broken, lopsided hips. The front doors were abnormally located to the right rather than front center. My gaze drifted up above the front doors to a slender and strange Gothic window with intricate crown molding on the right hip of the house. Its twin faced out of the uneven left wing. The front had two windows so close together they could be one if there weren't a thick piece of frame between them. "Is that the parlor?" I pointed at the 3-pane bay windows on the front bottom floor. Yes. The 2 tall windows above it are our chamber." John lugged a trunk off the surrey with the help of the driver. "And the other windows?" They eased the trunk to the ground. "More rooms." "The porches, they look peculiar." "I think they were additions." The Greek Revival columns on the porches would actually be quite attractive if they were a part of another house, but they didn't match a Gothic Revival. They only amplified its awkward state. The right porch had a few steps leading up to a small landing in the front doors. The bay windows completely interrupted the porches, separating them from each other. The left porch sat higher and stretched farther back, but without any steps, there was no way to reach it. I pictured some awkward little man deciding to build the porches and columns on a whim, having always desired a Greek Revival, and it being popular to remodel to one's own desires. People generally did so with the aid of a professional to guide them, but perhaps he felt otherwise. "All right, let's go inside." John picked up a few bags and led the way. I walked behind, slower, gawking. John opened the front double doors, releasing light into a long, narrow hallway with a door directly to the left and a door facing us at the end. I assumed the awkward little man's whim was only taken to the exterior of the home, but once inside, I realized he had more vigor than I thought. I looked down the hallway. Where are the stairs? In most homes, the stairwell is the first thing you see, and many take pride in the magnitude and luxury of their own. It's a mark of station. They're around the corner. John dropped 2 bags next to the coat rack and hung his hat. I detected the musty smell of cedar, lamp oil, and dead flowers. John grasped at a lantern on the table next to the coat rack and sparked the flame, but it was the middle of the day. "What are you doing?" "You want to walk around in the dark?" He held up the gleaming lamp. I shook my head. "It's daylight. There are no windows in the hallway, and I would prefer we left the doors closed unless someone is in a room." "What?" "It's a big house, and we don't want to lose each other. This way I'll always know where you are." I shuddered. Yes, but what a horrible way to live. You'll find it quite fine, I assure you. He glided down the corridor. Besides, it's only in the hallway. I didn't follow. I gaped at the gloomy passageway, a heavy feeling in my abdomen and an urge to whirl round and run home. What about gases? The rooms have to be aired to prevent toxins from building up. You can air them daily if you must. He stopped at the first door on the left and turned back to me. What about the cost of oil? Let me worry about the expenses, he motioned for me. Come along then. I stepped forward, hesitated, then walked to him. This is the parlor. John opened the door on the left to an oversized room. The bay window faced out front. Cobalt wallpaper darkened the room that brimmed with an outdated bric-a-brac. Little figurines, jars, bowls, and statuettes crowded every table, shelf, and ledge. This was stylish on my mother's day, but I intended to be liberated from such clutter. I walked in and approached a bowl resting on a silver stand with 4 swirling legs and 2 twirling arms that rose over the basin and down slightly, as though they were intending to plunge into some life-giving liquid. My fingers followed the metal curves around and around. The majority of the bowl was a tempting yellow, but it also had pink at the bottom left. The shade drifted upward like smoke, fading from pink to mauve to indigo and finally to the yellow. I suppose it was intended to mimic a flower, but the edges of the bowl rose at 2 spots, forming what looked like the ears of an owl. I touched 2 circular indentations buried in the yellow like eyes. There was a beak, too, formed from the silver stand, coming to a point in the middle. It was as though someone plucked the head off an owl and mounted it upon a metallic forest. My gaze dropped to the table this bowl rested on, and I realized the knickknacks distracted the eye from tangled table legs and bizarrely designed chairs of various sorts, none of which matched. In the main seating area around the fireplace, a green sofa with claw-like feet and curling arms seemed to shape like a menacing leer, accented by the white tassels of a large doily throw. I walked over and scrutinized a blue love seat that had the backs of 2 chairs, but a fused seat, like conjoined twins connected at the hip. Mismatched wooden chairs were placed sporadically around the room. I moved toward one with 4 legs and a straight back that had been carved out to form what looked like 5 ghostly hands that thinned at the wrists into lines which slid down the back in an S shape, but at the bottom curved around back up the chair in the opposite direction. I turned and another confronted me, then another, one with 2 bug-eyed shaped pads, one with 3 overlapped leaves for a seat, and one with thick layered waves that resembled the human muscles I've seen in books, but not those of a human, some other creature. The muscles of a chair? Everything in the parlor was like that. The cabinets had winding appendages like tentacles. They burst out at all sides and darted back in toward the body, but failed to make it before twisting all the way around and zapping back out again. Inanimate objects had hidden eyes built right in. Faces were embedded on every hunk of wood that could be found. The arms of chairs were carved with animal heads, paws, and claws. They gaped and smirked. Beady eyes peeked out from every crease and corner. Some were meant to be creatures, but others were just ambiguously lifelike. These peculiar things transformed the room into a murky woods filled with unknown beasts, and for a moment I felt lost in it all until I spotted another means of escape. On the far wall to the right, opposite the bay windows, I saw a second parlor door. Where does that lead? You'll see, John motioned for me, and I walked back to him. He shut the door and led me down the hall. The sitting room. John opened the door at the end of the hall. I nearly leapt, shocked by the bright color. Pink wallpaper blazed in comparison to the deep cobalt of the parlor. It was littered with ornamental chairs and tables, along with a writing desk and prairie cabinet. It too had bric-a-brac and ruffles sprinkled over every table, shelf, and ledge. Thousands of white and pink doilies drowned every table, chair, and the little pink sofa too. It reminded me of an ocean of pink goo, and if I were to sit in it, I'm certain I would suffocate, encased in a warm, flesh-colored swamp. Everything in that room must go, I thought. John closed the door. We turned left and faced another long corridor with 2 doors on the left and 1 on the right. The stairwell opened up like a cavern at the end. The first few steps exposed, then swallowed up into the wall as they turned. John pointed at the first door on the left. This is the parlor again, the door you asked about. We could have walked straight through? I don't want you making a habit of taking shortcuts. These corridors are here for a reason. I smiled with an unenthusiastic nod. John walked across the hall. This here is the library in my study. He opened the door, revealing shelves of books, leather armchairs, reading tables, and a heavy wood desk with an overbearing seat, like a dark throne. A narrow back rose to a point higher than any man's head. The seat was fashioned from a strange wood that looked cold and hard like metal. It was painted a blackish brown and more elaborate in sharp etchings. John closed the door. He walked back across the hall to open the second door on the left, the dining room. Inside was a narrow room with wood floors and vertical wood paneling halfway up the walls. The rest was covered in maroon wallpaper. High-backed chairs surrounded a long dinner table. A sideboard, a third the table's side, sat up against the right wall, along with a rolling server and cabinet topped with green decanters. I was especially keen on ridding the room of its unrelenting nature theme. The chairs had insects carved into them. The table had vines. The silver and servers were shaped like salamanders and leaves. The pitcher even had a leaf for a lid. The decanters were made of the brightest glowing green crystal, as though each had its own little fairy imprisoned inside. John shut the door. Shall we see the upstairs? The kitchen? I asked. It's in the basement. He pointed to the right of the staircase, where an even smaller set of stairs twisted down into a dark chasm. Down there? Yes, you've seen houses like that in the city, I'm sure. I had seen houses like that. Those were the houses where a lady of the house never stepped foot in the kitchen, but had cooks, butlers, and servants. We couldn't afford to pay poor souls to go down there. Then he pointed to the door next to the stairs. That's the servants' entrance. It leads out to the stables and outhouse. Come now, upstairs. He turned and we scaled the constricted staircase. It turned right after the first 5 or so steps, disappearing behind a wall. Once it turned, there were white walls on both sides and a low ceiling. It felt like they leaned inward. After 2 more rights, we reached the landing in another dark hallway. We passed 2 doors on the right and left without opening them. Those rooms are furnished, but we have no use for them, he said. A final door faced us at the end of the hallway. The staircase had turned so many times we were facing the front of the house again. And this is our chamber. John opened the door to reveal, finally, an agreeable room. It had pale wood floors and white walls. The furniture was plain, well-crafted, and made of dark, nearly black wood. The white and mother-of-pearl statuettes and elegant wall hangings were also lovely. I tried to go in, but John closed the door before I could. Let us get the rest of our things. Oh, all right. We turned and walked down the hall back to the stairs. Well, John asked as we crept down. He probably expected me to join him in his ravings. I forced a smile. It's unique. That is why I chose it. It's just not to my tastes. I'm sure I'll feel better once I redecorate. Redecorate? John stopped in front of me in the middle of the stairwell. Yes, redecorate. I felt hot and uncomfortable, halted in the cramped space. He looked back at me and shook his head. No. Pardon me? It felt like the walls were creeping closer. I don't think you should redecorate, he said. But why? We were lucky to find a home furnished and decorated. That's why I bought it. But it's awful. I regretted saying it as soon as John's expression wilted, then morphed into stern resolve. I am sure you will come to like it with time. He turned and continued down the stairs. I felt the weight of disappointment. Not only was John forcing me to live uncomfortably in every way, he was also wrenching away the one thing I controlled. We walked all the way down the stairs and halfway through the hall when I finally dispelled my mother's warnings to keep complaints to myself. John? I stopped walking. He didn't stop. I don't think I will like it with time. He halted at the end of the hall and looked back. My father and Mr. Carswell went to great lengths to find a home that would require little from us as a wedding gift. You should be thankful. I am thankful, but decorating and making a home a sanctuary is a wife's duty. I smiled. I want to create a sanctuary for you. I'm already happy, he said. I don't need you to do anything. You should be grateful to get so much when you hadn't even a dowry. My jaw dropped. He motioned for me. Come on. He turned and left me alone. The hall went dark except for a tiny glow in the corner where he had gone. I intentionally remained. I wanted to resist. I wanted to refuse. I had no dowry and nothing to stand on. He had accepted me when I had nothing to offer. He did me a favor. I had no right to make any requests, a slave to circumstance. I never wanted to leave that spot, face reality, but I feared the sound of him calling for me when he noticed I wasn't behind him. I missed my family. I wanted to go home. I blinked and fanned air towards my eyes. I cannot be upset by this, I told myself. My mother was right. I shouldn't have objected to him. He was right. The house was finished and I should be grateful. I will be happy with time. I will show John how thankful I am. I will be happy. We will love each other. From this point on, I was going to be a perfect wife. I forced my feet to budge. I walked quickly, turned the corner, and paused. Forgive me? He didn't look back, but answered cheerfully, Of course. He opened the front doors, letting in pure white light from outside. That is the end of chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed hearing it, and I hope you are sad that it's over and you want to read more. Go to my website to learn more about A White Room. I have backstory and all kinds of interesting stuff on there. And check out my blog if you want to see some more of the things that I'm up to. And check back for more vlogs. Thanks. Bye.